Hi, I'm Linda Lambert, and today I'm talking with Marian Exall, who is one of the editors for Spring and All. That's the book right over my left shoulder. The anthology written and edited by Red Wheelbarrow Writers and published by Lisa Daly's Sidekick Press in Bellingham, Washington. Marian is also the author of the Sarah McKinney Mystery Series, and she's here to talk about her own work and work that's coming up, and about her editing experience with Spring and All. And so I wanted to ask her, Marian, did you enjoy the process of helping some of the contributors shape their work?
Yes, I did. I worked with four authors, beginning authors, experienced, published writers, memoir and fiction, and I love it. It's great.
Was there anything in particular you learned from the process? You had quite a span of different genres.
Well, I think my role was sort of informed by about 15 years of participation in a critique group. You
Mhm.
know the one I'm talking about, and reviewing other people's work and learning from that. In fact, I think I learn as much from reviewing other people's work as I do from the feedback I get in that group. So yeah, I came to Spring and All with that kind of background and very ready uh, to jump into the role. I enjoyed it.
Did you, were there some authors who needed quite a bit more work, or were there some genres that were more difficult for you? Just wondering.
Yeah, I particularly enjoyed working with the beginning writer because she was just very ready to just sop up anything I had to give, and it made me feel good that I could really help her on her way. Um, but not to say that it wasn't fun to work with the others too. I think as an editor, you've got to believe in the writer, believe in the writer's voice, not superimpose your own ideas, but just believe in what their story is and try and enhance it, make it the best it possibly can be. But it's their story. And I think you've got to hold that, very close to you for, not try and take it over in any way.
Uh, were you working on your new book concurrently with editing? And I want you to tell us something about your forthcoming book,
Okay.
Daughters.
Well, my new book, and I've got a copy here, although it's not released officially until the 28th of February. I've been working on this book for 14 years. So yes, I guess I concurrently, not on and off, not all the time. Yeah.
Well,
It's historical fiction. The focus is 1939 and 40 in Latvia, but it follows the characters after the war and, in fact, right up until 2003.
well, I know that the story is based on a real diplomat who saved over 2,300 Jews during World War II.
That's right, but I would say not based on as much as inspired by, because it's a work of fiction. I want to make that clear. But it was inspired by a meeting with a Dutch woman called Edith Swartendijk, whose father was the consul for the Netherlands in Lithuania, not Latvia, and who did indeed, by issuing visas to the Dutch colonies in the Caribbean, Aruba and San Martin and Curacao, was able to save, as you say, 2,300 Jews, although he never spoke about it during his lifetime. And his heroism was completely unrecognized until quite recently. But
Was
I heard the story from Edith, and that inspired me.
Did he never speak of it because he was just a modest man, or he didn't want to draw attention to himself, or why?
There are two reasons, I think. First of all, um, he was not authorized to issue those visas. He thought he'd gone beyond his remit, and he had. In fact, he wasn't authorized to issue those visas. He did it to save the lives, obeying his conscience rather than the rules. The other reason he never spoke of it is he thought he had failed. He died in 1976, and only one of the many that he had issued visas to had been in touch to say that he had survived. Now, it's pretty typical for people, in my experience, after World War II, being reluctant to speak about their wartime experiences. So it's only recently, through the children or other sources that we are learning some of these stories.
Um, you must have done a lot of research because it's historical fiction, and you've emphasized that it's fiction. Can you say a little bit about the research you undertook to make sure it was accurate and the
Yeah,
drop and so forth?
I'm not a natural researcher, not like you. I'm a storyteller, not a historian. I did. I have to say that the sort of mega research, like, who was the president of Latvia and what was the date of the Russian invasion, those kind of things were fairly easy to discover, the big history picture.
Mhm.
What I had really a struggle with was finding out what Riga felt like, what it looked like, what it felt like in 1939 and 40, what the ordinary citizen experienced as living in Riga. And that was hard. Two things helped me, really. One was that Riga was not bombed to smithereens during World War II, as many European cities were. So the original cityscape is still there.
Mm.
And I could call up, the internet, pictures, maps. I used a lot of Google Street View. It's very useful just to get a feel for how people moved around the city. The other thing is that the third of the three invasions that Latvia endured during World War II, the Soviet invasion in 44, that lasted until 91. And basically, that kind of froze the city in place. It didn't go through the sort of urban renewal that many other cities went through in the 60s and 70s. So I was able to use fairly current maps, fairly current guidebooks. I found, I think, one old guidebook, but it wasn't pre-war. And I used those.
I have to admit, I had never even heard of Riga. Well,
Well,
that's my ignorance, but in a way, I mean, there's a lot being written about World War II, but you're kind of putting it on the map for a certain.
typically World War II fiction, there's lots set in France, there's lots set in the UK. Um, there is one writer I found, Rutas Sepetas, who has written about the Baltic states during World War II, one novel that I found. But otherwise, they really aren't on the map the way other countries that suffered from the Nazis are. So yes, I'm hoping that people will investigate a little bit more about the Baltic states, because their history is really fascinating, and I became fascinated with it as I found out more and more.
I wonder if that's one reason the publisher accepted it, is because this is an uncommon subject and an uncommon locale.
I don't know. Getting published after all this time of, querying agents and querying, I just feel it's just pure dumb luck. So I'm not sure. But But anyway, I'm glad to have focused on an area that hasn't been explored the way some of the other occupied countries have been.
Well, I think another reason it has some appeal is because you've got a strong focus on female characters. And can you talk a little bit about the way those characters contribute to the novel, the overall narrative?
Well, I'm more and more convinced that women are men fight the wars, but women, their resilience, their ability to keep going is what really counts in the end. And I think of my own mother in the Blitz in London in 1940, 41. So I wanted to highlight the stories of mothers and daughters, who endure the war. They don't wage it. They have to survive it. And particularly, I wanted to make this multi-generational because I wanted to explore the impact of war on the generation that were just children during it and how that affected their lives going forward. So as I say, the story carries forward into the children's later lives.
And you referred several times to story, that you're a storyteller. And how do you do that balancing act of creative storytelling and factual background? Is that a tension you have to?
Well, as I say before, I'm not a historian. I don't write history. And, I am pretty certain that when this book comes out, somebody's going to say, oh, that building isn't 4 floors, it's 3 floors, or, they're going to find things that I've got wrong. I'm pretty sure. What I wanted to get right were the characters and that, the impact that their experience had on them.
But you still did the research to get as much right in terms
Oh,
of
yes.
the
I
fact.
owe it to the characters to do that.
Yeah. What do you think sets Daughters of Riga apart from other World War II historical fiction novels? Because I know you've read a lot of them.
I have. Well, like the setting again, the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia are not much written about. That sets it apart. I originally wrote it a long time ago. The first draft was in chronological order,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a fairly simple story. And now, over the years, I have kind of braided stories and altered time periods, gone back in time and forward in time in the narrative and made it a much more complicated story. And I hope that doesn't just needlessly complicate it, but really adds depth and layers to the story.
I think I've read several versions, and I can attest to the fact that it has added layers of interest, and the characters have gotten deeper, and there's more to learn about them, and more to learn about the history as well, because of the things that they do and the things that and how they relate to one another. So, however much rewriting you did and however long it took, I think the result has been really positive, polished manuscript. And talking about that for a minute, having worked as an editor on Spring and All, how was it working with an editor on your own book?
Well, I worked with 2. Before I had a publisher, I worked with a local editor, Una Sherman Carver, and she did what she called a diagnostic, which is not a line by line edit, but more an overview. And that was incredibly useful to me in making sure that I got, because I hadn't, as I say, introduced all these layers over time. And sometimes when you do that, you lose you lose the overall picture. So she gave me an overall picture, and that was incredibly useful. And then the Wild Rose Press, my editor there, Nan Swanson, honestly, she was very, flattering, and she didn't have a lot of changes. So I feel like, yeah, maybe it did take me 14 years, but they were years well spent. And I didn't spend 14 years writing it, because the first draft was written actually before I started writing mysteries. And I got kind of intimidated by, the task, and put the manuscript away and thought, oh, a mystery will be easy, I'll write those. So I took a break of several years when I was writing the Sarah McKinney series.
Do you think there are other mysteries in your future? What's kind of
Oh
next
yeah,
for you as an author? Because you do write a good spellbinding mystery.
I love mysteries. When I say they're easy, they're fun for me. They're easy in the sense that there's a structure to them. You have a crime, you have a detective, you have a resolution. Within that, there's infinite variety. You can play around with the characters and the setting and all the rest of it. Right now, I'm working on I won't say an unreliable a flawed character, a flawed detective, somebody who's got poor impulse control and a drinking problem, and yet is still a very good cop. So trying to sort of make my detective a little bit more complicated, maybe, and and just sort of, again, add layers to it. That's what I like to do with stories, is add layers.
So when you envisioned her uh, at the beginning of the writing of this book you're working on now, you didn't see how complicated and flawed she was, but you had an inkling about that.
Well, my process is I have a vague outline, and then I let the characters go. I mean, it sounds a bit woo-woo, but after a while, when you're writing about these characters, and at night when you can't go to sleep, you're thinking about them,
Mhm.
they become sort of separated from you. They take on a life of their own. So yes, no, I hadn't really thought. I thought that she was a fairly thorny um, personality, a loner, but I hadn't really worked out the details of her until I started writing, until I got well into the book.
Is Loner the title of the book, or is that?
Loners, so far, working title, who knows?
Yeah. Well, do you have a bit of Daughters of Riga that you could read and conclude our time together in that way?
I would be very, very happy to. Let
Great.
me let me read. This is when Nellie Lesseps, the main character, and her daughter first meet the Dutch consul in Riga. Nellie consulted the paper on which she had written the address and pointed to a forbidding stone edifice about 2 centuries old. The Dutch tricolour fluttered above massive double oak doors which opened directly onto the street. As Nellie paused, considering the large iron bell pull, one of the doors opened. An elderly man, dressed in peasant smock and trousers, tucked Cossack style into felt boots, emerged carrying a straw broom. He acknowledged them with such a solemn bow that for a moment, and in spite of his costume and the broom, Nellie thought this might be the consul himself. She spoke rather diffidently in Dutch. Sir, we are here to register as Dutch subjects. The old man nodded, then confusingly shook his head. He said a greeting in Russian and with a sweep of his arm invited them to enter. That's not the consul, Nellie whispered as she led Danny inside. They found themselves in a large entrance hall, tiled in a checkerboard of black and white marble. An imposing stone staircase curved upward. The Cossack, as Nellie had named him to herself, was speaking through a door to the left. At first glance, the consul was not a prepossessing figure. He emerged from his office, still struggling into his suit jacket. His face was round and shiny, his fair hair receding, and his pale eyes blinked rapidly behind wire-rimmed glasses. Then, as he approached them with his hand outstretched, he smiled, a boyish smile that put Nellie at ease. "Hello, I'm Richard Vanderkamp. It's so good to meet you." "Nellie Lesseps. Yes, good to meet you too." If puzzled by his enthusiastic welcome, Nellie was determined not to show it. "I'm afraid everything's in a terrible mess, but I'm sure you'll soon sort it out." Then, turning to Danny with that charming smile, "I didn't know you were bringing an assistant, but she's very welcome, and there's plenty of room. Come, let me show you your office." With a hand under her elbow and still apologizing for heaven knows what, he guided Nellie into the room that twinned his office on the other side of the entrance. Danny followed. Nellie finally managed to interject a protest. "I think there's been a mistake. I came to register my daughter and myself as Dutch subjects. I've bought our passports. Here they are." She extracted the documents from her purse and thrust them at the consul. "Oh dear, I am so sorry. Well, I was expecting, you see, I've been looking for a secretary and someone was supposed to come today. You can't imagine how difficult it is to find anyone in Riga with secretarial skills who speaks Dutch. Anyway, I do apologize for the mix-up." And of course, Nellie does become the consul's secretary. The rest follows.
I find that so delightful, that introduction. And of course, it's always good to hear you read. And immediately I want to know, are you going to do an Audible version?
Not anytime soon, I don't think. I want to get this out in the world. As I say, it's been a long time in the birthing process. I want to get it out there. I want to see the reviews. And then we'll see. We'll see if it has legs.
And I'm pretty sure it has legs, but what is the publication date? And why don't you hold the book up again so people can take a look at it?
Daughters of Riga is available for pre-order now. The release date is February 28th.
2024. And
2024, yes.
well, thank you, Marian. It's been really delightful chatting with you, and I'm looking forward to the launch, whenever that is, and to seeing how this book gets out there in the world.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Linda.
We will talk again soon.